Good evening, and I want to welcome everyone here tonight to our next chapter in the book of Acts, chapter 25. And we will begin with the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with his commands and commands us to engross ourselves in the words of Torah. Amen. All right, now I want to go ahead and start. Here's our ubiquitous timeline, and here we are, right about in around 60 CE is where we're at this point. Some people say it's a little earlier and so forth, but none of them go beyond 60 CE. So that kind of puts it right there. This is about 6 years before the big uprising in Israel, and of course 10 years before the destruction of the Second Temple. All right, so to kind of recap this, Paul, if you remember, had been brought to trial before Ananias, or actually he was being accused by Ananias, the high priest, and the trial was in Caesarea, and it was before Felix, who was the governor of the Roman Judea. And so the hearing really never got going anywhere. They had this big lawyer there, Tertullus, and he got up there and made his spiel about Paul and his charges and so forth, but it never really got going anywhere because they had no eyewitnesses. So they said Paul was creating a disturbance in the temple. Well, where are the eyewitnesses that said he was creating a disturbance in the temple? Where were the eyewitnesses that said he brought a person, a Gentile, into the temple, which was a death penalty? There were no eyewitnesses because he didn't do it. So rather than just drop the charges and let him go, Felix, he didn't really want to do anything that would cause trouble with these Jewish leaders, because they could create hate and discontent and all sorts of stuff, and riots, and of course then word of riot would get back up to Rome, and so Felix then would be in trouble with Rome. So he just kind of kicked the can down the road. He kept Paul bottled up there in Caesarea for a couple of years, and also Paul was trying to get a bribe out of, he was trying to get a little bit of a kickback, a mordida from, Felix was trying to get this mordida out of Paul, and he should have known, maybe he didn't, but, back in those days, itinerant preachers didn't have a whole lot of money. So he was not a televangelist, and so Paul didn't have a lot of money. Felix was then recalled to Rome and replaced by Porcius Festus after a disastrous action that Felix took to quell a disturbance by the Jews in Caesarea. So after, let's go ahead and we'll. Are there any questions before we begin this week? Anything that we'd covered last week? All right. So let's go ahead with the first verse there in Acts 25. 3 days after Festus arrived in the province, he went up to Jerusalem from Caesarea. Now, Festus had sailed from Rome, when he went down to Caesarea. Now, I don't know if they had a physical change of command, where Felix was still there while Festus came in, how that was done. But he arrived in the port of Caesarea, and in 60 CE. Some people said it was like May of that year, but we don't know. And almost immediately he made the trek up to Jerusalem to meet these religious leaders there, and it appears that he was briefed about Paul, and he knew the situation. He knew what he had, the problem that he had there, and um, almost immediately, uh, 3 days is all he had. He headed up to Jerusalem, and so I just wanted to show you a picture here of what we're talking about. He said he arrived in the province, that it was the Roman province of Judea, and it covered this space, right in here in the blue or purple or whatever color it is that happens to show up on your screen. For mine, it's kind of purple. But and then the red up here begins the bottom of the Syrian province, and eventually in after 70 AD, when Jerusalem, the temple fell and everything, the Romans combined the Judean province with the Syrian province. They just called it the Syrian province. So the headquarters that was there at the Caesarea Maritima went away. So so this guy Festus, he took off, and it kind of showed that he was very eager to address problems and get them solved so that they wouldn't have any problems as with the populace. Festus actually had a pretty good reputation as compared to Felix. So he was described as a wise and just administrator. We get a lot of the word about Festus from Josephus, and he described him as a very good administrator and was very, very much interested in running the show properly and keeping people, happy with their governance, rather than if you don't like what I'm doing, I kill you, that sort of thing. That was the Felix way of handling things, and Festus was much more of a politician, as it were. So we talked about that. I'm sure he was very aware of the Paul problem. And so here we go on verses 2-5. There was the ruling Kohanim, the priests, and the leading Judeans brought charges against Paul. There being in Jerusalem, they're talking to Festus here. They were urging him, asking a favor to have Paul sent to Jerusalem, planning an ambush to kill him on the road. Now Festus then answered that Paul was being guarded at Caesarea, and that my computer just blanked out there. Paul was being guarded at Caesarea, and that he himself was about to go there shortly. So then he said he said, "Let the prominent men among you go down with me, and if there is any wrong in the man, let them accuse him." So the Jews, they pretty much realized that they didn't have much of a hope of doing away with Paul through the Roman courts. Why? Because their case was too weak. They didn't have any way of really having a proper trial, because they had really no witnesses. A very, very weak case, and so consequently, they were urging the new governor to return Paul to Jerusalem, so that on the way, when they get up in those little mountain passes and so forth going into Jerusalem, they could kill him. Now, we don't really know how the information was revealed, but perhaps, I don't know, maybe we can assume that those same familial connections that saved Paul before, when they were going to get the Sicarii to kill Paul, those guys that took a vow not to eat or drink until Paul was dead. Um, this was 2 years later, and I'm sure those guys were either hungry or dead or broken their vow. But anyway, they, somehow or another, Paul's family found out about it, and his nephew went before the Romans and told them about it. So that's why Paul ended up in Caesarea under a Roman guard. So um, possibly those same kind of connections, were still there, and so they again figured out that the Jewish leaders were going to try to kill Paul. So by this time, though, this is 2 years after that event, that Ananias had been replaced in basically the last few days of Felix's reign down there in Caesarea. Ananias had been replaced by Ishmael, was the new high priest. So Festus did not agree with their request. We don't know whether he knew about the assassination plans or whatever, but anyway, he just says, no, we'll keep him down here, and you're welcome to bring your people down here to Caesarea, and we'll talk about it then. It could have been that nothing more interesting other than Festus was interested in getting back down to Caesarea and beginning his administration down there, because, like I said, remember, he had only been there 3 days. And if you'd ever been to Caesarea, back in those days, 2,000 years ago, I am sure that it was a very, very cool place. Just looking at the ruins today and all the stuff that they had, it was definitely a cool place. And remember, Herod the Great built Caesarea. And so, he was a great builder. Nothing that he built was a halfway job. It was always really good. So let's go ahead. After spending not more than 8 to 10 days with them, he went down to Caesarea. The next day, he sat on the judgment seat and ordered Paul to be brought in. When he arrived, the Judeans who had come down from Jerusalem stood around him, bringing against him many serious charges which they could not prove. All right, now the judgment seat, what that did, that referred to a public setting. It was a seat on the tribunal. It was something that was not done behind closed doors. This was in a public setting, and this is it was typically in a public place. Now, they don't say exactly where he did it this time, where his trial was this time, but when he was there was a certain place that in the palace itself that Paul was seen by Felix, but then that was more of a private setting. This would be a much more public setting. So the charges that were made by the Jews appear to be the same ones, the same tired old charges that they had when Tertullus was presenting them back in chapter 24. And the Jews could not prove them. They had no witnesses. So all Paul had to do is just categorically deny the charges, and that ended the trial, because it was a he said, she said kind of a thing. And without actual witnesses, then the Romans would not convict, especially in a death penalty, a capital case like this one was. So the trial seems to have proceeded pretty much like the first one did before Felix, and then Luke summarized the proceedings, and Paul said in his defense, and going ahead with 8 and 9. Paul said in his defense, I have committed no offense against the Torah of the Jewish people, or against the temple, or against Caesar. But Festus, wanting to do the Jewish leaders a favor, said to Paul, are you willing to go up to Jerusalem to be tried before me? Now, that's a little strange, I think. As the new governor, Festus didn't want to do anything that would turn the Jewish authorities against him. especially in view of that, that Felix had just had that bad deal there in Caesarea, where some of the Jewish people were protesting, and so he went in there and killed a gazillion of them, and that's why he was recalled to Rome. So he was not real sure how to proceed. We see that in verse 20 later on, but he wanted to stay on the good side of the Jewish leaders, and so he said, well, maybe he could do them a favor somehow. So he asked Paul if he would be willing to go to trial up in Jerusalem, where the site of these alleged crimes were. And I think it's kind of strange. Well, not so much strange, but just interesting that he asked Paul's permission to bring him to the trial up there in Jerusalem, because Paul was not a common criminal. He was a Roman citizen, had yet to be convicted. He was just a he was unconvicted, if there is such a word, but he was a citizen, a Roman citizen, and he had rights that the governor had to respect. Remember what happened if a leader, a governor, or somebody deprived a Roman citizen of the rights, whatever they did to deprive them of that right would be done to the person, the governor or the centurion or whatever. It'd be done to them in spades. So that's where the Festus then had to tell Paul, ask him, would you mind going up there? And he could not force Paul to go up there because Paul was a Roman citizen. So going on to 10 to 12. But Paul said, I am standing before Caesar's judgment seat where I ought to be tried. I have done no wrong to the Judeans, as you very well know. And if then I am in the wrong and have committed anything worthy of death, I do not seek to escape death. But if there is nothing to their charges, no one can turn me over to them. I appeal to Caesar. Then, when Festus had consulted with the council, he responded, you have appealed to Caesar you shall go. Paul turned down this offer. Now, he, I don't know, maybe he feared that in Jerusalem, popular opinion might go against him, even more against him than it did before. Where they had the people in the temple that just didn't even know what was going on, but there was a good riot going on, so never let a good riot go to waste, and they jumped in on it against Paul. So then he made an appeal for a trial in Rome to Caesar. Now, that was the right of every Roman citizen who believed he was in danger of violent coercion or capital punishment in a lower court. Only Roman citizens who were murderers, pirates, or bandits caught in the act could not make this appeal. So Paul clearly did not fall into that category. Now, at this particular time, Nero, this was the beginning. Nero was the emperor, and he had begun his rule in 54 CE AD. And so at this point, he was, a pretty good emperor. And Paul had no fear, no reason to fear him here in 59 or 60 AD, whatever year it was. Only after AD 62, that's when Nero went, his rule just went haywire, and he turned against Messianic Judaism. So nothing in the New Testament indicates that Paul's appeal to Caesar was, contrary to God's will or anything. Paul probably considered this appeal as the only way that he was going to reach Rome, having, he'd already been in house arrest there in Caesarea for 2 years. And so I guess he figured, okay, this is the last time I'm going to, my last chance here to get to Rome. So Paul's appeal basically got Festus off the hook with the Jewish rulers, because basically he says, hey, the guy's a Roman citizen. He's appealed to Caesar. What can I do? I can't really do anything now. So, he's off the hook, because he would have actually released Paul, because he definitely was innocent of all of these things. But the charges that were against him were political sedition and profaning the temple, and both of those were capital offenses. So therefore, Paul could appeal. Now, there's a Bible scholar named Michael Gray Fowle that argued that Paul appealed to Caesar while he was under Festus's authority, rather than when he was under Felix's authority, because he believed that Festus would respect his request for a hearing, whereas Felix would not. Now, that's a little speculation. We don't know, but it sure sounds true, the way that Felix did his business and the way that Festus did his administration. So Luke shows a real unusual interest in both Felix and Festus, comparing the two guys. They were very complex people, like a lot of people are, and they had opposite tendencies, conflicting tendencies. Felix, it's kind of funny. Felix is the guy that he didn't like what you said. Well, he'd kill you, but at the same time, he was attracted to Paul and this message. Um, you know, even though he was attracted to it, he tries to seek a bribe and leaves Paul in prison just to appease the enemies. Festus, on the other hand, he presents a favorable image of himself to the public, but he's handling his handling of Paul's case again is a lot of favoritism. Neither one of these guys is willing to offend the high priest and start political troubles by releasing Paul. So Luke's characterization of the Roman governors, it kind of points to the fact that Paul here, he's caught in the middle in a this web, I guess you'd say, of politics and all of the self-interested maneuvers by everybody, the guys in Jerusalem, the priests and so forth in Jerusalem wanting to kill him, and so forth. So then you got the two judges there that they're wanting to just keep everything calm and quiet. So, but we need to look at Paul in this, that he was not a helpless victim. As whenever the opportunity came, Paul was right ready, and he continued to preach the gospel, witnessing for the Lord. And although he was obviously under house arrest, he's denied justice and freedom. He sticks with the course, and he doesn't give up, and he stays right with it. Why? Because he knows that he's in God's will, and so he just continues on. So, are there any questions at this point? Any questions or comment that anyone might have? Okay. In verses 13 and 14, now after several days had passed, King Agrippa and Bernice arrived at Caesarea to pay their respects to Festus. Now, while they were staying there several days, Festus laid Paul's case before the king, saying, there is a man left behind as a prisoner by Felix. Now, this King Agrippa II, his name was actually Marcus Julius Agrippa the Second. Now, he was the son of Herod Agrippa the First, and the grandson of Aristobulus, and the great grandson of Herod the Great. Now, I think I got a. Let's see. I've got a. There it is. A. What do you call it? Family tree. the Herods that run down here to Herod Agrippa. All right, so it was Herod the Great up here that he was the one that tried to destroy the infant Yeshua and killed every male child under the age of 2 in Bethlehem. And one of his sons, and Antipas, Agrippa the Second's great uncle, beheaded John the Baptist and tried Yeshua. And then Agrippa II's father, Agrippa I, right here, he executed James, the son of Zebedee, and brother of John. He had also imprisoned Peter, and now he died in Caesarea. Now his son Agrippa the second is the man Paul now faced. Now you remember this guy Herod Agrippa the first. He's the one that got up in front of people, and he was all dressed. He liked to dress in silver, threaded stuff, and he would address people as the sun was coming up in the east, and he would stand out before them, and the people said, "Oh, he speaks like a god," and instead of tell him, no, it's just me, it's just a plain old Herod Agrippa the first. He sucked it up, and so the Lord sent an angel down and struck him with some kind of worm stuff, and he died within like 2 or 3 days of a terrible, terrible wasting disease, eaten up with worms. So that's just a little bit of interesting trivia there. Next time you're playing Trivial Pursuit. All right. Now, at the time he visited Festus, this Agrippa II guy down here at the bottom, he was the king from that Rome had appointed over the territory northeast of the Judean province, and that was the Galilean province. And he lived in Caesarea Philippi, and that was, he renamed that Neronius. In honor of Nero. Now, Agrippa was about 30 years old at this time, and his sister Bernice, her Latin name was Veronica, was 1 year younger. She was 29. He ruled his region up there in around Galilee for 20 years, from AD 50 to AD 70. Now, if you remember old Felix, his wife was Drusilla. Well, Drusilla was Agrippa and Bernice's sister, the younger sister. You can see here that Drusilla, wife of Felix, and then you got Bernice. Now, Bernice was she was an interesting character. She had been married. She got married, and that her husband died almost immediately. And so then she married her uncle, and he was the king of Chalcis, wherever that is. And then he died shortly thereafter. And then she lived with her brother, Herod Agrippa II. Now, it was kind of a very suspicious relationship, and the word on the street back in those days was that it was an incestuous relationship. So we don't know. I mean, there's a lot of speculation that was the way it was, but in one instance, for her to kind of dispel these rumors, she married the guy who was the king of Egypt, one of the Ptolemies, and that didn't last very long. But Bernice was, let's see, how do you say it in a nice way? Kind of an interesting character on kind of sort of the Jezebel side of the tracks, because she really had some interesting stuff going on with her. She ended up being the romantic interest of Titus, who conquered Jerusalem and then ended up being the emperor for a while. And as soon as he was the emperor, he ditched Bernice because she was not really popular in Rome, because she was kind of one of those um, people from the outer limits of the Roman Empire. She wasn't a Roman. She didn't, she was not aristocracy in their mind. So going on with this, yeah, here's the territory that Agrippa the second held here in Galilee, and then this area over here in the yellow, and also this area up here. And so they evidently visited Festus on the occasion to pay their respects to the new governor, the new guy coming in from Rome, because remember, they owed their position and everything to Rome. So it was a good thing for them to stay on friendly terms with the new guy. And Agrippa and Bernice, they were essentially favorable to the Jews, and they both of them tried to avert the Roman massacre of the Jews in AD 66 through 70. And it was kind of interesting also that this guy Agrippa had the authority from Rome. He was given the authority from Rome to pick the high priests in Jerusalem. Even though his territory didn't include Jerusalem, he was given that authority. Kind of an interesting situation. All right, going ahead. Any questions at this point? Anybody got a question or a comment about our what we've talked about so far? All right. So in going on in 15 to 21. When I was in Jerusalem, the ruling Kohanim, the priests, and elders of the Judeans brought charges against him, asking for a judgment against him. I answered them that it was not a Roman practice to turn over anyone before the accused meets his accusers face to face, and he has an opportunity to make his defense concerning the charges. So when they came together here, I did not delay, but on the very next day sat on the judgment seat and ordered the man to be brought in. When the accusers stood up, they were not bringing a charge of what crimes I suspected. Instead, they had certain issues with him about their own religion and a certain Yeshua who had died, whom Paul claimed to be alive. Now, since I was at a loss as to how to investigate these matters, I asked whether he was willing to go to Jerusalem to be tried there in regard to them. But when Paul appealed to be held in custody for the decision of His Majesty the Emperor, I ordered him to be held until I could send him to Caesar. Now, who's he talking to? This is Festus talking to King Herod Agrippa II. This is the guy, Herod and Bernice. Okay, and he was this guy Agrippa II. He was the last of all of the Herods. The Herods had ruled from something, I think like 36 BCE, somewhere in that time frame. To he was the last, so it was up in it'd be 70 CE, so about 100 years that they had ruled. They'd been a ruling family, and if you wanted to call the Hasmoneans, it would have gone all the way back to 165 CE BCE with the Maccabean takeover of the government and taking it back from the Seleucid king, and so. He was ruling that small part of Israel, the Galilee, and he lived up in Caesarea Philippi, and again, that was a very, very interesting, nice place at that in that time frame. And it was kind of where, modern Israel and Lebanon and Syria all kind of come together. That area, and he was mainly Jewish blood. Um, being from the Maccabean priest kings, that line, and like we had already said that he was the grandson, great grandson of Herod the Great, and so um, that's his pedigree anyway. Um, they kind of considered this guy, even though he was favorable to the Jews, uh, they kind of considered him, okay, he's kind of a base fellow. He's kind of not that much of a moral person. He was adulterous, and he was licentious, and they tolerated him because they had to, but there wasn't this great big hate relationship either with him. So King, this Herod guy, King Herod Agrippa II, he made this protocol visit to Festus, congratulating him on his being appointed governor of Israel, of Judea, actually the Judean province, and so he came down with his sister Slant, romantic interest, because she accompanied him everywhere he went. And so Festus, acknowledged he was really just puzzled over this Yeshua business and resurrection for the dead. I mean, he just looked at it and said, "What? Resurrection? Roman law didn't cover resurrections. Yeah, insurrections, yeah, but resurrections, no." So to Festus, it was all religious, mumbo jumbo. It was incomprehensible. He had never heard anything like this before. And he doesn't even know what to say, doesn't know where to begin with this thing. Paul wasn't guilty of anything that he had to do with, the law. He was not a murderer or a thief. He wasn't a criminal. Maybe he's a little bit kooky, but because of this resurrection thing. But yeah, that was it. So Festus, he didn't know how to write up charges against Paul to send to Rome, and so he wanted King Agrippa to kind of give him a hand on clarifying the charges against Paul, because Agrippa kind of had the reputation for being an expert on Jewish matters, and being part Jewish himself, and having grown up in the Herodian family, he was the go-to guy. So he was as I'd mentioned before, Rome had given him the power to appoint the Jewish high priest, and so Festus described this dispute as one about their own religion, the Jews only, Judaism, as it were, and the Jewish religion. And so this is really just further evidence that Messianic Judaism was viewed as a Judaism in those days, in those early days of the body of Messiah. So if the Jews didn't recognize it, certainly the Romans did, that Messianic Judaism was a part of Judaism. So, all right. Okay, I'm missing a verse in there. Verse 22 says, "Then Agrippa said to Festus, I would like to hear the man myself. Tomorrow," he said, Festus saying, "you shall hear him." The case kind of interested Agrippa, and he asked to hear Paul. Festus readily agreed, hoping that Agrippa would be able to help him understand Paul's situation and provide information as that he could use in his report. Remember, he didn't know how to write up the charges. I mean, What do you write up to an emperor and say, yeah, this guy is preaching the resurrection? The what? He had to have some of the proper wording. All right, so verse 23. So the next day, Agrippa and Bernice came with a great pageantry. They entered the audience hall with the commanders and the most prominent men of the city. Then, at the order of Festus, Paul was brought in. So Festus used this occasion here, all this pomp and circumstance, uh, as an occasion to honor Agrippa and Bernice in front of these Caesarean leaders, because Caesarea was not a place that was terribly friendly to the Jewish folks. And then Felix, killed all the people there. Killed a bunch of Jews there. So Festus, again, trying to play the peacemaker. Now, the event was held in an auditorium in order to accommodate the crowds, and there were 5 commanders. Each one of these commanders in Caesarea were responsible for 1,000 soldiers. They had equal authority. Remember, with Claudius Lysias, the commander of the cohort that was based in Jerusalem. And so, besides these commanders, that said many of the prominent men of the city were brought in, and so I suppose you could say that everyone who was anyone was going to be there at this place. So Agrippa and Bernice, of course, they conducted themselves as very, very important people, and but when you look right at it, the one that was really important here was Paul. So looking at then the last few verses of this chapter. Festus said, King Agrippa and all present with us, you see this man about whom the whole Judean population petitioned me, both in Jerusalem and here, shouting out that he ought not to live any longer. But I have found that he has done nothing deserving of death, and when he himself appealed to his majesty the emperor, I decided to send him. Yet I have nothing specifically to write to my lord about. Therefore, I have brought him before you, and especially before you, King Agrippa, so that after the investigation has taken place, I might have something to write. For it seems illogical to me, when sending a prisoner, not to report also the charges against him. So, in reviewing all of the reasons for conducting the hearing, Festus acknowledged that Paul had done nothing worthy of death. This is not he said, I can't put him to death for this. And Festus referred to the emperor as his lord, Kyros. And the meaning was at least his majesty, and maybe perhaps it was even a deity, this emperor worship stuff. But Paul then, he preached about his Lord, and that was definitely a higher authority than Nero. And so that's what Paul preached to this crowd. You'll see in chapter 26 when we get into that in 3 weeks from now. Festus decided to send Paul to Nero rather than sending him back to Jerusalem. So after explaining his need, in kind of a face-saving language, Festus turned the whole hearing over to Agrippa. And Festus, he could not send Paul to Caesar without the letter that said what he was really accused of. He couldn't say, hey, I don't really know why I'm sending this guy to you, but he's probably innocent, but he said he wanted to come see you, so here he is. That would probably not go over too well with the Caesars. So Luke undoubtedly included all of this, Festus' preamble in Acts, because it was another opportunity and another testimony by a Roman official that Paul and Messianic Judaism were not threats. And so that kind of ends up this chapter 25, where Festus has made his preamble, his introductory remarks to King Agrippa. We'll see in chapter 26 then that King Agrippa then uh, he gets out there and he interrogates Paul, and he's looking into it with some interest. And you'll see, Agrippa tells Paul, he says, depending on how you read the Greek, it could say, uh, you almost persuade me. So it's an interesting little play. This defense that Paul puts out before King Agrippa is the longest defense that he has of the 5 defenses that in Acts, where he's on trial. This is the longest one of those. So it will be a very interesting case. Now,